Hello, I'm Christian, and welcome to the Jamoir Leadership Podcast, a show where we talk about effective collaboration, influence, and leadership in an increasingly complex world. My interview partner is Dr. Dirk Schlimm. Dirk is an international leadership expert and the author of Influencing Powerful People. The purpose of this podcast is to share ideas and stimulate discussion, and it does not constitute professional advice of any kind. If such advice is needed, the services of a competent professional should be sought. The speakers, host, and Jamoir International Incorporated are not to be held responsible for any use, misuse, or reuse of the content. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Jamoir Leadership Podcast. Today we are talking about different business ownership models, how they affect business culture and strategy, and how the cultures can collide. Dirk, just jumping into a bit right now, it sounds rather abstract. So maybe as we begin, can you start by explaining what you mean by ownership model?
Yeah, thanks, Christian. When we think about a business, there are always three core stakeholders. So first, they're the customers of the business, and really, without customers, you can't really have a business. Then there are the people who work there, and that includes management, employees, or workers. So that's a second stakeholder group, if you will. And then there are the owners and the owners of the business. And this ownership can come in different forms. So, for example, a corporation can be owned by public company shareholders. That means anyone can buy a share in the company. So that's what's known as a publicly traded company or a public company. So an example would be Amazon or General Motors. Then there are entrepreneurial companies that are substantially owned or controlled by the founder. And interesting enough, an example in Canada would be Good Life Fitness. They have 450 fitness studios, but they're still owned by the person who founded this and started this off really with the first studio. Then there are multi-generational family businesses, some of which can go back 100 years or further. So an example would be Cargill, which is an American food corporation that was founded in the 1800s. And then government can also own businesses. So for example, Canada Post Corporation is owned by the Canadian government. And of course, there are businesses where these ownership forms are mixed, but again, the form of ownership can have a big influence on the culture of the company.
Okay, Dirk, thanks for that explanation. That's very helpful. So my question is now, how is it that the ownership model can influence a company's culture?
Sure. So let's take maybe two opposite ends of the spectrum here. So if you take an entrepreneurial company and a government-owned company, the entrepreneurial company will make decisions very quickly and may even change their minds on decisions. They will try something. If it doesn't work, they will try something else. And they call that, in modern management parlance, it's called they're agile. And then a crown corporation, they have a lot more rules to follow. They have a lot more stakeholders to consider. It's still very political. They're very much in the public eye. And so decision making will often take longer and changes will be harder to make.
Right, Dirk, that makes sense. But do you have an example to really clarify that?
Yeah, sure. So maybe even when you think back onto one of our earlier episodes, we talked about Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla, and he's one of the most famous entrepreneurs of our time. And even though Tesla is publicly traded, it is still a very entrepreneurial company with Mr. Musk at the helm. And you remember that he had decided to buy the social network company Twitter for $44 billion. And then he changed his mind, which led to a lawsuit from Twitter. And now just last week, we had another announcement that he wants to buy Twitter after all. And so you can see that here. And we just would not expect something like this from a government-owned corporation. That it would just not, I don't think it would be happening that way, really.
Right, Dirk, that makes a lot of sense. I couldn't imagine Canada Post having that kind of drama. And I guess just bringing it back down to where we might be, I guess if hypothetically, if I were to move from one type of company to another, this can be a bit of a culture shock. And I really need to know which environment would be best suited for me as an employee. If I work at a place like Tesla, I have to I guess, learn to roll with the punches that come with a figure like Elon Musk at the helm?
Yeah, Christian, exactly. So you really want to be sure that you can be effective in the type of environment you're in. And I've seen this, for example, when a smaller company or startup was acquired by a larger corporation, people really can have a hard time adjusting. And so you need to understand the rules of the game for the type of company you're in. The same way you need to understand the rules of the game for the type of industry or profession you're in. And so any kind of manager job starts with a technical proficiency, say in engineering and finance or in marketing. So that's really your base, and that's incredibly important. But then when you start to manage, you have to build on that. You have to add people skills. So that would be, let's say, the second layer here. And then the third layer really are the organizational skills or organizational savvy. It's answering the questions, how do we do things around here, and then that you can be effective and bring your technical proficiency and people skills to bear in that environment that you're in.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, Dirk. But earlier we got to talking about how these cultures can collide. So where does that come in?
Yeah, so while there are different forms of ownerships, as we just talked about, they're not always as neatly separated as you would expect. And I just alluded to this earlier. So think about the Elon Musk and Twitter example. So Tesla is a publicly traded company, but Elon Musk still is the quintessential entrepreneur. So you have that dynamic, and they're also family-owned companies, so multi-generational family companies that are publicly traded. So, for example, Walmart is a great example of a publicly traded family company. So that means that you and I, we can buy shares in Walmart, but the heirs of the founder, Sam Walton, still own over 50% of the company, and they control the company.
Right, Dirk. That's fascinating. And it brings up some household names here. And it's just fascinating to think about it. So maybe just to bring some more out of this here, are there any other examples of different kinds of mixed ownership models?
Yeah, and that's really there are, Christian, and that's really the point of today's episode. So I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal, and I really recommend for people to who are listening in to read this. And the article talks about how more and more family businesses are being bought out by private equity companies.
Private equity. That is a term I have heard, Dirk, but maybe you could give us a brief explanation of what private equity is.
Yeah, so a private equity company is a company that pools the investments of wealthy individuals or public pension funds, and then they buy companies. So you and I could not invest here into that company, and that's why it's called private equity as opposed to publicly traded company where everybody can buy shares. So that means that the company that's being bought now has an outside investor, but this investor becomes much more involved in running the business, and this investor brings their own agenda and purpose to the company.
Okay, Dirk. So with this example, how do cultures collide here?
Yeah. So family companies or founder-led companies often have a very long time horizon. They build a business for the long term, maybe even for the next generations or a generation down the line. And they're often built on a solid financial foundation. So they have low or very low debt. And they often pursue purposes beyond just making money. So I worked early in my career in a founder-led company, and pursuing environmental causes was a big part of the company's purpose. And it even meant spending extra money on this, like donations to environmental charities, or sometimes meant taking a bit of a controversial stand that some industry players wouldn't like.
Right, Dirk. And I'm getting the sense that an underlying idea is that private equity might not do those things.
Yeah, so that's right. Of course, they're very different companies and they have very different purposes. But at its core, private equity companies make their money by buying companies and then selling them in a fairly short time. Sometimes it's maybe 5, 6, 7 years. So it's a much shorter time horizon, and they have to answer to their investors, of course. So they typically have a shorter outlook, and also they will finance the purchase of the company with debt. So the private equity company will put some of their own money into it, but they will also borrow money to finance the purchase, which means that the company they have bought that previously had little debt now overnight may have substantial debt, and that has to be paid back, and interest has to be paid as well. So you can go from a financially stable company to a company that has a lot more risk. And what I've experienced when working with people in that situation, they thought we are performing well here, but now that they have been taken over, the expectations have gone up significantly, and the term that they use is success has been priced in, and so a certain level of performance is now no longer a big accomplishment. It is expected, and so what was great performance yesterday is expected performance today, and that can be a bit of an adjustment.
Okay, Dirk, thanks for outlining all that. But as always, let me challenge this a little bit. It sounds like in this type of model of ownership that transition is quite common. And we have also seen the blended models with Tesla and Walmart. So wouldn't the people involved know all this?
Yeah, so Christian, that's actually an excellent question, and I had the opportunity to discuss this with the different private equity organizations actually, and I had a event on this with the Healthcare Private Equity Association in New York, and so their members are very smart people who buy healthcare companies, different types of clinics, and even veterinary services, and so we had an entire evening talking about this. What happens when they acquire a company with a strong-willed founder, and founders often are strong-willed, and they want that strong personality as part of their company, but they also want to set the direction for the firm, and they want to bring in a new direction, and so that can lead to difficult conversations. And what I've learned from this and other experiences is that people intellectually understand that change is coming, but when it does happen, it is still different. And people find it actually quite hard to imagine what it is like to work in a different culture when you have never done this or never have experienced this before.
Right, Dirk, I hear what you're saying, but my next question might be the obvious. What's the solution?
Yeah, so Christian, there's a couple of things here, but before a private equity company buys a family company or an entrepreneurial company, they will look at that company in a lot of detail, and that's what they call due diligence. And due diligence, very important, requires a lot of discipline. And a sophisticated private equity company will not just look at the technology, the customers, the market position, the finances, and so on. They will also take a very close look at the people involved. They will look at the leadership and management of the company. And sometimes they will hire psychological assessment companies for this as well, because the people are so important. And I think that's a very smart practice, to really look at that leadership and management team as part of your due diligence process. But what's talked about a lot less, in my experience, is that due diligence can also go the other way. So if the founder or the family want to stay in the business, and so they're really bringing this private equity company as a partner and an investment and part owner into the company, then that due diligence has to go the other way as well. So if they want to stay in the business, they have to do their due diligence on the people who will be, at least at some level, calling the shots or will be part of calling the shots. And again, for a company founder, that's often a new experience. Hard to imagine when you have been the boss for so long. And you also have to realize that your potential buyer is probably quite skilled at talking to entrepreneurs. You're not the first company they're buying. They know how to talk to you. And so you want to dig a bit deeper. And you also have to realize that sometimes we hear what we want to hear. So you have to listen very carefully when you do your reverse due diligence, if we want to call it that.
Right, Dirk. So we have to be looking on both sides of the equation here. So we need a bit of a two-way, or coming from both directions, due diligence and the ability to listen carefully, which again makes a lot of sense. And as you're saying that, I'm coming to the conclusion sometimes, especially in this context, we have to listen as much for what is said and what is not said.
Wow, that's actually, Christian, that's a great point. And I think I'm glad you made that point.
Great, Derek. I'm glad. So then a follow-up question. What do we do about all this when we are in this situation? How do we manage these different perspectives?
Yeah, Christian, good conflict management is absolutely essential in that situation. And we really should have a full session on that.
All right, Dirk, then we better give a bit of a teaser here. What would you say is the most important or critical principle with all this?
Yeah, Christian. So there are a few things. So to me, the most important one is this: we really must make a conscious effort to get along and solve differences constructively. So this really has to become a performance measure, like financial or sales targets are performance measures. We must recognize that differences in perspectives are normal. In fact, they have to be expected, given that those different business cultures are colliding. And so we must ask ourselves periodically, how well are we doing in working out our differences? So how do the other people involved perceive us, and what's their perspective? And I think, for example, we should really do this debrief after every board meeting, so it becomes normal to talk about these things rather than waiting for a problem to occur. And then it gets awkward. But if we get the relationship right, I think the fusion of different business cultures can actually become a bit of an advantage.
Right, the best of both worlds, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. And I think if we can combine the passion and drive of an entrepreneurial company with the rigor and discipline of a private equity company, and then solve those issues constructively, I think this can be a powerful combination. But it is a bit of an if, and so it's something we must work on.
Okay, thank you, Dirk. That's very helpful. Those highlights, we'll have to revisit this topic in another episode. And I think just thinking about what you said, it's an excellent reminder that all relationships take work, and they all take some level, at least, of self-awareness. So again, looking forward to digging in. But for now, let me just summarize a bit of what we talked about today. First of all, we need to remember that there are different business ownership models, and that these models have a big influence on the company culture. Secondly, we must understand that the culture of the company we are in, we have to work within that and be aware that if we change companies, we might have to adjust. Even if it's within the same industry or area of expertise, culture can be very powerful, and we have to be able to navigate it. Thirdly, culture can collide when companies change their ownership model. Public companies can become private and vice versa. Private equity companies can buy family companies, so on and so forth. This type of culture change must be carefully managed to be successful, and we must make building strong relationships and leadership performance expectations a priority. So, Dirk, what do you think about that?
Yeah, Christian, I think that's really it. It's well summarized as always. I really got nothing to add here.
All right, Dirk, that's what I'm hoping to hear. That's great, because we are out of time for today's episode. So, Dirk, thank you so much for sharing, and everyone listening, thanks for tuning in again to the Jamoir Leadership Podcast. And just in case you don't know, we are on all your favorite podcast catching apps. So find us if you have an iPhone on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen to your podcast. We're there, and we love to be a part of your regular routine every other Monday. So we will catch you again in 2 weeks.